She knocked and said, "I was told you need a cook." The widowed cowboy saw her daughter behind her and whispered, "I think I need a family." Wyoming Territory, summer 1879, late evening. Clarabelle stood on the dusty porch of Riker Ranch, just as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows across the corral. She carried a heavy cast-iron pot in one hand and a battered leather-bound cookbook in the other. The dusk glowed red against the hay bales, lined up like silent sentinels. Taking a steady breath, she lifted her knuckles and rapped sharply on the weathered door. "Sir, I was told you need a cook." Her voice was calm, but the tremor in her hands betrayed exhaustion and hope. Inside, Jonah Riker smelled fresh hay and leather, but also the faint trace of sorrow in the air. He opened the door a crack, his tall frame silhouetted by lantern light in the hallway, eyes set in a line of tired permanence. He had lived alone since his wife's death from fever 3 summers ago. Since then, he let the ranch run, but not his heart. He looked at Clarabelle's arms, laden with cooking gear and a book worn soft as memory. But he stiffened the moment he saw the child step forward, a little girl with dark curls and enormous, cautious eyes, creeping out from behind her mother's skirt. "Daisy?" Clarabelle murmured, her features softening as the girl's tiny hand gripped her sleeve. Jonah shifted. He had not allowed any new faces in his home since, he had no idea how long ago now. And yet something cracked inside him. The child's gaze did not ask pity. It asked for belonging. He inhaled, his voice rough as uncut lumber. I need a family." Clarabelle froze. Daisy blinked at him in surprise, clutching the pot strap. Still not offering a word, Jonah put distance between them, as if stepping back from a cliff. Then he opened the door wide and silently stepped aside. Clarabelle set down the pot gently on the porch rail. Daisy stood motionless, thin face illuminated by fading light. Clarabelle nodded once, voice small with relief. "Thank you, sir." Jonah cleared his throat. He took a step back into the cabin, motioned toward the inside. Clarabelle lifted Daisy's hand and entered carefully, the pot in one arm, the cookbook in the other. The door swung closed softly behind them. Inside, the air smelled of dust, leather saddle, and the faint trace of his wife's rose-scented shawl long since stored. A single oil lamp burned at the far end of the hallway. The walls were bare, save for saddles and a rifle hung with precision. His wife's portrait stared down from above the fireplace, her dark eyes full of warmth he had not allowed himself to feel since her passing. Clarabelle cleared her throat. "I know this is sudden. I understand if you have no work for me. We came all the way from Kansas. I can cook and I can help with chores. Daisy—" She paused, turning to her daughter. "She will be quiet." Jonah looked at her, then studied the little girl, golden curls and hesitant stance. He remembered his own daughter's laughter, now gone. He glanced at the swinging lamp, then at Clarabelle's worn shoes and fragile calm. He motioned toward a chair by the hearth. Clarabelle carefully placed the pot on the floor and took Daisy's hand to guide her to the seat. The child sat, legs swinging, staring at the firelight until her reflection melted into the glow. Clarabelle set the pot somewhere near the table. Jonah cleared his throat. "What do you know about cooking for ranch hands?" His voice was terse, because he did not want to betray interest. Clarabelle straightened and replied evenly. "I cooked for travelers and teamsters on the Santa Fe Trail. I learned recipes from my mother and grandmother, campfire stews, biscuits, preserves. I know how to feed men who ride hard and sleep on the ground." He looked at her, then at the pot again, then at Daisy's hands folded in her lap like a prayer. He nodded. Clarabelle exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Riker." He paused. "No titles here." His single word echoed. She bowed her head slightly. "Jonah." He grunted acknowledgement. Clarabelle set down the pot, arranging it near the hearth so its smell would rise. Daisy leaned forward, peering at Jonah's worn boots. Jonah cleared his throat once more, then offered, "Get yourselves comfortable. There is water in the basin, blankets on the shelf." Without hesitation, Clarabelle helped Daisy out of her coat and placed it gently over the back of a chair. The child's stance relaxed just a bit. Jonah turned away and looked toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms above. He did not say more. Clarabelle bent to light the small kerosene lamp on the table. Daisy sat close to the hearth, face flushed, eyes heavy from travel. Clarabelle removed her gloves and brushed the child's hair back, slowly, softly. Jonah watched from the doorway, unmoving, as he had done many times before, but this time he did not feel nothing. He felt a cautious flicker. Clarabelle looked up, meeting his eyes briefly. "We will not be in the way," she promised. He nodded once. "We'll see." He closed the door without turning on the main light. Outside, the wind whispered against the logs. Inside, 3 hearts pulsed quietly in the dim glow of a lamp. And Jonah Riker wondered if he might have thrown open more than a door tonight. That evening the wind howled against the wooden walls of the Riker ranch, but inside something warmer stirred. Clarabelle moved about the modest kitchen with sleeves rolled and purpose in her step. She was making her mother's southern meat pie, layers of slow-cooked beef, carrots and onion tucked beneath a flaky golden crust. The scent of thyme, garlic, and browned butter began to fill the air, weaving through the beams and softening the hard edges of the house. Jonah Riker sat at the table, his elbows on the worn surface, eyes steady on her hands as she worked. He said nothing, didn't ask what she was cooking, didn't offer to help. He just watched, quiet, unreadable. Clarabelle pulled the heavy pie from the oven, setting it down with a thud that startled the silence. She portioned it into 3 plates, each slice steaming in the cold evening air. Daisy clambered into her chair, folding her hands like it was Sunday dinner. Her eyes shone. Clarabelle slid a plate in front of Jonah. "It's not fancy," she said, "but it's filling." Jonah didn't reply. He took a bite, chewed, then another, then more. Clarabelle waited, hoping for something, a nod, a word, anything. But Jonah just kept eating, in silence, until the plate was clean. He stood, carried his dish to the basin, and began to wash it himself. Clarabelle blinked. She'd expected resistance, maybe even a command. Not this. Quiet, almost respectful. She joined him at the sink with her own plate. Their hands brushed once over the soap. Neither spoke. Across the room, Daisy yawned, then reached for a rag. "Mama said I can help clean," she said, dragging it along the floorboards. Clarabelle smiled. "Just the corners, sweetheart." Daisy nodded, moving around the table like a drifting feather. But the long day and the warm food caught up fast. Within minutes, she'd sunk into the padded chair beside the fireplace, rag still in hand. Her head lolled sideways, her eyes fluttered closed. Jonah turned and saw her. He froze. That chair, his wife's old rocker, hadn't been used since she died. It still held the shape of grief, the memory of nights spent waiting, hoping, praying. And yet, here was a child, small and trusting, curled where silence used to sit. Jonah moved to the hallway. From a drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years, he pulled out a woolen blanket, his wife's, patterned in blue and rust. He hesitated a long moment, fingers trembling over the edge of it. Max felt the weight of his stare and the turmoil in his. Then he returned, stepped quietly toward the fire, and knelt beside Daisy. Gently he draped the blanket over her shoulders. Clarabelle, standing at the sink, saw it all, her breath caught. She hadn't expected kindness. Not like that. Not from a man with so many walls. Jonah stood again and didn't look her way. Instead, he walked to the door, opened it a crack, and stared out into the cold. The wind blew in sharply. He didn't flinch. Clarabelle whispered, "Thank you." He said nothing, but his hand rested on the doorframe longer than it needed to, like he was bracing against something stronger than the weather. That night, the scent of baked meat lingered in the air long after the plates were cleared. The fire crackled softly, and under a blanket that once belonged to sorrow, a child dreamed without fear. And in a house where grief had spoken loudest for 3 long years, something gentler, something unspoken, finally answered back. The sun hung high over the New Mexico sky, casting long strips of light across the yard behind the ranch house. The dry wind carried dust across the hard earth, but Jonah Riker did not seem to notice. He was in the corral, brushing long strokes down the back of an aging mare with a faded brown coat and one clouded eye. Clarabelle stood at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on a towel, watching the quiet man with the same quiet animal. The horse didn't flinch when Jonah ran the brush over her shoulders, even when he murmured things low enough that only the wind might hear. Clarabelle had seen this kind of gentleness before. Once, in her father's hands, when he thought no one was watching. She filled a glass pitcher with lemon water, sliced from the lone fruit she had brought from town, and added a few crushed mint leaves. She stepped out into the heat, crossing the yard barefoot. Jonah looked up when she approached, but said nothing. He kept brushing, slow and even. Clarabelle offered the drink. "It's hot," she said. Jonah glanced at the pitcher, then her, then nodded. He set down the brush, took the glass, and drank deeply. "She yours?" Clarabelle asked, tilting her chin toward the horse. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "Belle. Had her since before the war." Clarabelle blinked. "That's a pretty name." He met her eyes for just a second. "It was my wife's." She understood then why he treated the horse like memory-made flesh. "She seems gentle." "She lost her eye in a hailstorm," he said. "Some horses panic when they lose sight. She just adapted." Clarabelle nodded slowly. "Strong ones always do." They stood in silence a while longer, the wind threading through the fence rails. Jonah turned to face her, the glass still in hand. "You from Georgia?" Clarabelle looked surprised. "The accent?" "That, and the way you cook," he said with the barest flicker of a smile. She allowed herself a soft chuckle. "Born in Macon, left when I was 16, too many ghosts." Jonah's eyes darkened. "I know the feeling." Clarabelle shifted, then said quietly, "My father died at Antietam. My brothers not long after. Mama passed before the war ended." Jonah looked down at the horse and stroked her neck. "My wife died here. Fever took her fast. 2 winters ago." Clarabelle's voice barely carried. "And Belle?" "She stopped eating after," Jonah said. "I think she missed her." Clarabelle reached out and ran her fingers along the horse's mane, letting the silence hold them for a moment. "She reminds me of someone," Clarabelle said. Jonah looked up. "Your husband?" She shook her head. There was no wedding, just a mistake made in trust. He disappeared before Daisy could say her first word. Jonah studied her face, not with judgment, but something else. A softness, maybe. A new understanding. "I thought about giving her his last name," Clarabelle added. "But he didn't earn it." Jonah nodded slowly. Names mean something. The heat pressed around them, but Clarabelle felt the heaviness in her chest ease a little. Maybe it was the shade. Maybe the fact that someone was finally listening. Jonah drank the last of the lemon water and handed her the empty glass. "Thank you." She took it. "You're welcome." He reached for the brush again, and as he ran it down Belle's side, he said, "Daisy likes to talk. You don't." "I used to," she said. "Then life gave me more to carry than to say." He paused, looking at her. "You still carry it well." Clarabelle met his eyes. "So do you." Neither of them smiled. But when she walked back to the house, Jonah watched her go, not out of suspicion or politeness, but because for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so necessary. The wind had shifted by late afternoon, turning sharp and urgent, the way it did when a storm was on its way. Clouds stacked like bruises over the horizon, and the golden hue of the prairie faded into gray. Inside the cabin, Clarabelle stared up at the ceiling where a slow, rhythmic drip pattered into a tin bucket. She set down her sewing and stepped outside, eyes lifting toward the roofline. A board had come loose near the chimney. From the ground, she could see the dark patch where wind and water had begun to claim their ground. Jonah was hauling feed into the barn when she came around the side of the house, with a hammer in one hand and a bundle of shingles under the other arm. "You should not be climbing roofs," he said, before she even spoke. Clarabelle didn't break stride. "You should not be letting rain into your kitchen." He stood, arms crossed, watching her make her way toward the stacked ladder. "The last storm ripped 2 boards clean. I was going to fix it." "When?" she asked, already climbing. "Before or after the next one tears the whole roof off?" He muttered something under his breath and followed. The wind picked up as she reached the top. From up there the view stretched for miles, rolling grass, the fence line, and far beyond that, the ghost of the old road. But Clarabelle didn't look outward. She focused on her task, kneeling near the loose plank, fingers steady as she nailed it back into place. Jonah's boots clunked behind her. He joined her with a grunt, handing her a fresh nail when she reached for one. "You do this often?" he asked. She gave a half smile. "Cooking feeds the belly, but carpentry holds the roof over it." He chuckled softly, his first real laugh since she'd arrived. Together they worked in rhythm. She held the boards, he hammered. She tucked the edges, he sealed the gaps. Bit by bit, the old roof came back together. Just as she turned to reposition a bundle, her foot caught the edge of a beam slick with dust, and she slipped. Her arms flailed, the sky spun. But before she could fall, a hand gripped her wrist, strong, fast, anchoring her like a rope thrown from the heavens. Jonah had lunged forward, his other hand braced on the wood, his chest heaving from the sudden movement. Clarabelle's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers curled tightly into his arm. Their faces were inches apart. "I've got you," he said, voice low and rough. She didn't answer, couldn't. They stayed like that, breath mingling, hearts racing, eyes locked in something far older than words. His hand didn't let go. Not until... "Dinner's ready," Daisy's voice rang up from below like a sudden bell. The spell broke. Clarabelle inhaled sharply. Jonah helped her up, his grip lingering just long enough for both of them to feel the absence when it left. They finished the last shingle in silence, though neither heard the wind anymore. By the time they climbed down, the sky had begun to glow with the strange lavender light of an approaching storm. Clarabelle dusted her hands and glanced at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jonah nodded, jaw tight. "I meant what I said. I've got you." She didn't reply. She just went inside, heart pounding with something that wasn't fear, but felt just as fragile. The morning after the storm was calm in the way only prairie mornings could be, still, pale, almost reverent. Clarabelle rose early and began straightening the sitting room, while Daisy still slept, curled under a quilt by the hearth. She was dusting the shelves when her hand brushed the edge of a drawer beneath the bookshelf, one she had never seen opened. The knob was stiff, unused. It stuck, then gave way with a faint groan. Inside was a bundle of old letters, tied neatly with faded ribbon. Clarabelle hesitated. She glanced over her shoulder, no one in sight, then untied the ribbon carefully, as though the paper might crumble at her breath. The writing was tight, beautiful, and unmistakably feminine. She read the first few lines, her heart tightening with every word. "Jonah, my love, I know the fever will win this time. There is so much I wanted to say, too much to fit in one note. But if you find this after I'm gone, please, please remember. Don't let your grief become the house you live in. Grieve me, but do not bury yourself with me." The signature at the bottom was small. "Belle." Clarabelle's fingers trembled. The weight of the words pressed like hands around her chest. She carefully folded the letter, tied the ribbon again, and placed it back exactly as she found it. She said nothing. That evening, the air held the first breath of winter. A cold draft whispered through the corners of the cabin, and the fire burned steady in the hearth. Clarabelle stirred the pot of beans and cornbread, her thoughts still circling that delicate script. Daisy sat at the table, coloring. Jonah came in late from tending the livestock. He smelled like leather and pine smoke, his usual silence wrapped around the room. But tonight felt different. After supper, Clarabelle began to gather the plates. Jonah stood too, then surprised her by gently taking them from her hands. "I'll handle this," he said. She nodded, unsure. When she returned from tucking Daisy into bed, the kitchen was clean, the room was dim, lit only by the fire's low glow. Jonah sat in his usual chair beside it. The other chair, the one across from him, always empty, always sacred, was pulled slightly forward. He looked up as she entered, then he patted the cushion beside him. Clarabelle stopped. He said nothing, just waited. Slowly, as if unsure whether she was trespassing on something holy, she crossed the room and sat down. The fire cracked. Jonah's voice was barely above a whisper. She always sat there, even when she was too weak to speak. She liked to listen to the wind. Clarabelle looked at the flames, then at him. She was kind. "I can tell by the way this house remembers her." He nodded. "She left me a letter." "I know," Clarabelle said softly. Jonah didn't react. He just turned his head toward the window, where the stars blinked faintly behind frost. "She said I shouldn't let grief become the house I live in." Clarabelle leaned forward. "Do you think it already did?" "I think it still tries to." She looked down at her hands, resting in her lap. "And now?" Jonah turned toward her, eyes darker in the firelight. "Now, maybe I need to let someone else help build the next one." Malone's work quickly, broad, bristly mustache. The fire popped between them. Clarabelle felt her breath catch. Not because he had said he loved her, but because he had offered her a chair, a space beside him, a beginning. The wind carried a strange silence that morning, too still, too watchful. Clarabelle noticed it first, the way even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Jonah was out by the corral, fixing a fence rail, while Daisy played with her rag doll on the porch steps. That was when the man arrived. He came on horseback, alone but confident, dressed finer than most passers-by, in a brown coat with polished boots and gloves too clean for honest work. His horse snorted and pawed at the ground, like it sensed the unease before the humans did. Clarabelle stepped outside, instinct prickling. She reached behind the doorframe for the small kitchen knife she always kept near. The man dismounted slowly, smiling like a salesman but with eyes that measured every corner of the ranch. "Good day, ma'am." He tipped his hat. "I believe we have mutual concerns. The little girl, Daisy, is it?" Clarabelle's voice was steel beneath civility. "Who are you?" He tucked his gloves into his belt, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Name's Warren Keyes. I'm kin to the late Samuel Langdon, my cousin, which by law makes me the next blood relation to his daughter. I've come to claim custody." Clarabelle felt her knees weaken. Daisy shrank behind her, clutching Clarabelle's skirt. "That man is not your cousin," Clarabelle said, her voice trembling with fury. "And Samuel never gave you the right to speak for him. He's dead, and so is whatever claim you think you have." Warren gave a slow, calculated smile. "I figured you might say that, which is why I've brought documentation." He waved the folded paper. "Sworn statements, official seal from Santa Fe, all legal, and when the marshal arrives next week you'll be expected to comply." Jonah had approached silently behind the man, tools still in hand. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, eyes locked on Warren. "You're trespassing," he said simply. Warren turned, taking a step back at the sight of Jonah's size. "And you must be Mr. Riker. I was told you were a reasonable man. I'm here for a child, not trouble." Jonah's face remained unreadable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for a weapon. He just stepped forward, standing between Warren and the porch. "This house ain't yours. This child ain't yours. And your blood never earned you the right to call her family." Warren blinked, thrown by the calm. "I have rights. You want to risk harboring a child that by law—" Jonah cut him off. "No law gives a man the right to twist a child into ransom. I've seen your kind before. Dressed clean, words slick, hands dirty." Clarabelle stepped forward now, fury burning behind her calm. "You worked with the quartermaster in Fort Lincoln. My daughter's father trusted you once, and you used that trust to smuggle records and maps out west. You got thrown out for bribery. Now you think because I was there, because I saw what you did, you can use my child to silence me?" Warren's mask cracked just slightly, but then he smiled again. You've got quite the imagination, but let's see how bold you are when a federal writ comes to your door. I'll be back, and I'll have a warrant next time. He mounted his horse without waiting for response and rode off, the dust of his threat trailing behind him like a storm cloud. For a long moment, neither Jonah nor Clarabelle spoke. Daisy clung to her mother's leg, wide-eyed. Jonah finally turned. "We'll get ahead of this," he said. "We'll find the marshal first. Bring the truth before he does." Clarabelle nodded slowly, eyes still on the road. She did not tremble. She would not. Because this house was no longer just a shelter. It was a line in the sand. And Jonah Riker had just drawn it with nothing but his stance and his word. The train whistle echoed faintly from the canyon below as Jonah Riker adjusted his coat against the biting wind. Town was an hour's ride from the ranch, but his purpose made the journey feel shorter than usual. He tied Bell to a post outside the brick building marked Elliott & Sons, Legal Services. Inside, the air smelled of ink and old dust. The man behind the desk looked up, spectacled eyes narrowing at the tall figure in the doorway. "Help you? I need to speak to Joseph Elliott. They said he's the one who handled land disputes along the old rail line, civil protections too." The man squinted, then nodded toward the back room. "You are in luck. The old dog is still biting." Jonah stepped in. Joseph Elliott was thin, with a long gray beard and hands that trembled only slightly as he set down his teacup. But his voice was steady. "You got a claim or a problem?" "Both," Jonah said, removing his hat. "It's about a woman and her daughter. Someone's threatening to take the girl, with forged papers." He placed a bundle on the desk. Old letters, notes, fragments of legal exchanges Clarabelle had kept through the years, proof of her name, her story, and her place beside Daisy. Joseph sifted through them silently. Then, with a slow inhale, he sat up straighter. "I remember the Langdon scandal. Quartermaster's aide, smuggling manifests west. Feds tried to bury it, but too many wagons went missing for folks not to notice." Jonah nodded once. "He was caught in it. Then she ran. Been running since." Joseph poured himself another cup and added, "You trust her story?" "It's my life." The old lawyer studied him, eyes sharp. Then he pushed his chair back and opened a locked drawer. "There's a clause, brought in after the war. Humanitarian guardianship. Used to protect orphans and widows when bureaucracy was slow or cruel. I can file the paperwork, make you the legal custodian on grounds of stability, and clarify that Clarabelle's record has no warrantable offense, just unverified accusations." He scribbled on a form, then looked up. "You know, Mr. Riker, the West only stays wild when good folks keep quiet." He paused, tapping his pen. "You just shouted back." Jonah left the town that afternoon with a leather folder tucked inside his saddlebag. Back at the ranch, the sun had begun to dip low. Clarabelle was packing. She moved quietly through the kitchen, folding Daisy's clothes into a canvas sack, her face unreadable. Jonah stepped into the doorway, casting a shadow across the floorboards. "You do not have to go," he said. "I do," Clarabelle whispered. "That man will be back. I cannot have Daisy grow up afraid because of me." Jonah reached into his coat and held out the folder. She hesitated, opened it. Inside were stamped documents. Official. Legal. Her name, listed beside Daisy's. His name, as guardian. Clarabelle stared at the papers like they were something sacred. "No one's going to take you from here," Jonah said softly. "Not with this." Clarabelle did not speak. Not at first. Then her shoulders shook. One breath, two, and the tears fell without warning. Not of fear, not of panic, but because for the first time in years she felt seen, trusted, protected by law, not just love. She clutched the papers to her chest and looked at Jonah through blurred eyes. "You did all this?" He only nodded. She stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart. "You did not promise anything," she whispered. "But I believe you more than anyone who ever did." They stood there a long time, between a packed bag and an unpacked truth. And outside, The wind no longer felt cold. 1 month later, the hills of Riker Ranch no longer echoed with wind alone. Laughter danced on the breeze, woven between the clucking of hens and the clatter of pans from the open kitchen window. Clarabelle stirred a pot while Daisy read aloud from the porch, her little voice carrying across the dirt yard. Jonah was repairing the chicken coop, humming under his breath. It was not a song anyone recognized, just a rhythm that meant peace. Then hooves, dust, voices. Jonah stood up, wiping his hands, just as a black wagon approached, flanked by 2 men on horseback. One of them was the man from weeks before, the so-called cousin, wearing a smug grin. Behind him rode 2 deputies from town. Clarabelle stepped outside, heart taut like a wire. But before the men could speak, another figure appeared. Joseph Elliott. Behind him nearly 24 townsfolk, mothers with baskets, farmers with work-stained hats, even a pair of school teachers with ink-stained fingers. "We've come to clarify a few things," Joseph said, stepping forward. The sheriff dismounted, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Elliott, we were told there's a custody issue." "There is no issue," Joseph interrupted, holding up a sealed folder. "Clarabelle Langdon and Jonah Riker are the legal guardians of Daisy Langdon. The paperwork is filed and witnessed, and this man," he gestured to the stranger, "is under investigation for falsifying documents and harassing a registered household." The man sputtered, "You've got no proof." "We do." A woman stepped forward, the baker's wife. "Clarabelle has cooked for half this town, never asked for anything back but a place to share what she had. And Daisy's been teaching our young'uns how to read," added the old blacksmith. "Girl's 5 years old, and already doing more for this place than most full-grown men." The sheriff turned to the stranger. "Sir, I suggest you leave before this town charges you with endangerment and fraud." The man turned red, cursed, and rode off, no badge, no claim, no place left to threaten. Clarabelle let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Daisy slipped her hand into Jonah's. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and lanterns were lit one by one, something remarkable happened. The townspeople returned, not with pitchforks or torches, but with gifts. Loaves of bread, wildflowers tied with twine, a quilt from the widow baker, even a new saddle for Belle. They hung lanterns along the fence line, one by one, each glowing softly in the twilight. When asked why, the blacksmith's wife simply smiled. "Every home deserves light. This one, it has 3. Jonah, standing at the porch steps, felt something shift deep inside. Not grief, not guilt. Belonging. Clarabelle stood beside him, holding Daisy close. They were not married, not by church or contract, but the way Jonah rested his hand on Clarabelle's back, and the way she leaned into it, it told the whole story. No vows needed. That night, after the food was eaten and the music quieted, Daisy curled up on the porch swing with a notebook in her lap. She wrote, "They say a house needs wood and nails, but I think all it needs is 3 people who won't give up on each other." The moon rose high, and from that little porch on the hill the world felt right. Not perfect, but warm. A place with 3 chairs, 3 bowls, 3 voices sharing laughter in the dark. And somewhere between the glow of the lanterns and the hush of the stars, the Riker house became a home. If that story touched your heart, if you felt the warmth of a home, built not from wood but from loyalty and love, then this is only the beginning. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of courage, quiet devotion, and romance born from dust and danger, stories that remind us that even in the roughest lands, love can still take root. So if you want more stolen glances, more heartbeats under starlight, more characters who fight not just with guns but with honor, then hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and saddle up for your next unforgettable ride. This is where love writes its legend. This is Wild West Love Stories.